contextualize that interaction a little bit and just maybe provide like some thoughts on what we saw and whether it should have been a big story or should it have not effectively?
Everything's a big story with Caitlin Clark. Come on now, you know this, but
I know.
Here's my take on it, and I'll back up and kind of give you some of the backstory. So when they won their last game, not their last game they played, but their last win against the Valkyries, that was the game after Caitlin returned from the back injury saga and all of that. And she was pretty fired up, went at Tiff Hayes, and they were going at it. She was fired up. She got a text. She got a flagrant foul.
Fever Beat reporter James Boyd sat down for an exclusive interview that has been circulating heavily across WNBA media circles, covering the team's defensive struggles, the Caitlin Clark and Stephanie White dynamic, Raven Johnson's rookie season, and Kelsey Mitchell's role within the group. The segment on Clark drew the most attention. Boyd provided background on the sideline moment that went viral during the Portland game. He traced it back to Clark's return from a back injury, specifically the win against the Valkyries, where Clark was visibly fired up, getting into it with Tiffany Hayes, picking up a flagrant foul, and playing with an elevated intensity throughout.
On at it, she was fired up. She got a text. She got a flagrant foul in that game. It was a lot, but they win. And she was pretty good in that return. And I asked Stephanie White after the game, how do you coach emotion and what's good emotion versus bad emotion? And she mentioned that this fire that Caitlin plays with, this, insatiable thirst to win, is something I don't want to take away from her. And I would honestly liken it to more of like the Kobe and Michael Jordan world. And I say this, I'll preface this by saying,
after that game, Boyd asked White directly how she coaches emotion and where the line sits between productive fire and counterproductive behavior. White's answer was clear. The competitive hunger Clark plays with is something she has no desire to strip away, and she compared that edge to the kind seen in players like Kobe Bryant and Michael Jordan. Boyd's framing around the emotional outbursts was deliberate. He covers the NFL and pointed out that a helmet getting slammed on an NFL sideline generates zero controversy. It gets labeled passion and moved on from.
Kobe and Michael Jordan world. And I say this, I'll preface this by saying, I think that all athletes, male or female, should be allowed to have emotions. I think, I cover the NFL. How many times I've seen a helmet get slammed on the sideline and no one loses their mind? Oh, he just cares. And then it gets blown out of proportion with the WNBA. But all that you say, with Caitlin, she is not always a nice teammate or a nice person to referee or a nice person to coach because of her edge. But the edge is what makes her special. So within that, maybe about a week ago, Stephanie was saying,
the same behavior in the WNBA context gets amplified into a crisis. His position was that Clark is not always an easy teammate, an easy player to referee, or an easy player to coach, but that the same edge driving those friction points is exactly what makes her exceptional. White's own words, shared roughly a week before the Portland incident, were that the fire needs to exist, but occasionally has to be pulled back in. When that pulling back happens visibly and forcefully in front of cameras, it gets escalated into a narrative about a broken relationship.
A week ago, Stephanie was saying, you know what? I don't want to coach that out of her, but there are times where it has to get reeled back in. And I think when people see it get reeled back in forcefully, like we saw in that Portland game, it can get blown up into this huge big thing where it's like, oh my gosh, it's just rift. They don't like each other.
And me personally, I feel as if there is something going on between Stephanie White and Caitlin Clark that is major, because if there wasn't, here's my thing. If there wasn't anything that was significant, they wouldn't.
Boyd stopped short of calling the White-Clark dynamic a full rift, but he did note the rarity of what was seen, a star player being substituted out mid-game during a confrontational moment is something that rarely happens at the professional level. He acknowledged why both parties were guarded with the media in the aftermath and said the most accurate description of the two is that they are alike in the ways that produce friction. Both stubborn, both intense, both single-minded about winning. White herself reportedly told Boyd she coaches hard, and Clark told her she wants to be coached hard. The tension is two competitive personalities colliding, not fundamental incompatibility. The volume of damage control coming from the organization was identified as the clearest signal that something significant is unfolding internally.
Here's my thing. If there wasn't anything that was significant, they wouldn't even address it. Guys, I've been covering sports for 5 years on my channel. If there was nothing going on, there's nothing to talk about. You guys have to always remember that when it comes to these coaches and these players, if there's no tension, if there's nothing, there's no story. And if there's no story, then there's no conversation. And without it being any conversation, there's nothing going on. But with them constantly trying to do damage control,
the argument was straightforward. Teams do not hold 2-hour closed-door meetings, revoke media credentials, and repeatedly address the same narrative unless there is genuine pressure being managed behind the scenes. Each incident on its own could be explained away. The pattern of incidents. The meeting, Sophie Cunningham mentioned that the team appeared uncomfortable having publicized Scott Agness losing his credentials. The repeated public statements trying to reframe the Clark White narrative points towards something more substantial than routine in-season friction. Whether the tension sits primarily between Clark and White, between Clark and teammates, or between Clark and the front office remains unclear from the outside.
It being any conversation, there's nothing going on. But with them constantly trying to do damage control, with them trying to do damage control of this entire situation, that leads me to believe there is definitely some locker room drama that is happening between Caitlin Clark and Stephanie White that the world do not know about. And it could be Caitlin Clark and other players. It could be Caitlin in the front office. But I'm telling you guys this verbatim, what I know. Can't nobody tell me nothing other.
What the evidence suggests is that the organization is in active containment mode, and the fact that every thread of controversy keeps leading back to the same central figure is being read as confirmation that the situation is real and ongoing. Boyd's willingness to ask questions others in the press corps avoided was noted as a significant factor in why his reporting has cut through. The argument made was that the best reporters track what fans are actually asking and find the courage to bring those questions into the room rather than staying in safe territory to protect access. Boyd's recent press conference questions to White, which were more pointed than anything the rest of the room had raised, were a direct product of that approach.
Can't nobody tell me nothing otherwise, because if there was nothing, they will not address it. If there was nothing, Scott wouldn't have got his credentials pulled. If there was nothing, we wouldn't see all of these crazy things that is happening in the last probably, I don't know, week go down like this. Why did they have a meeting? That 2-hour meeting Sophie Cunningham exposed. Why was it such a secret meeting that
it may also explain why his position within the credentialing structure could eventually come under the same pressure that ended Agnes's access. The fallout from the Caitlin Clark and Stephanie White sideline incident continued, with both figures making coordinated public statements that attempted to close the story down. The response from observers was skeptical, not because the statements were implausible, but because of how closely the language in each aligned with the other, raising questions about whether a PR operation had been brought in to manage the situation. Clark's comments went further than simple professionalism.
Am exposed. Why was it such a secret meeting that really Sophie, they didn't even want Sophie to tell anybody about that meeting? Why? Why is that? Why do teams have meetings? To calm down locker room drama. They don't give a damn what we say on these microphones. They don't give a damn what Stephen A say. They don't care what any of these media people say if nothing was going on. We have to remember that. It don't take a rocket science to figure this out.
She referenced a moment from the previous season when she was injured during a game against Connecticut and broke down in White's arms, describing White as someone she would go to bat for the rest of her career. She also pushed back against outside commentary, suggesting that the people driving the narrative online spend their time on their phones and simply do not see the private moments that define what a relationship actually is. That particular line landed awkwardly with a segment of her most dedicated supporters, the fans being described as people who sit on their phones all day, are largely the same ones who have spent considerable time defending Clark publicly in comment sections on social media and during stretches of the season when her performances were scrutinized.
Stephanie White wants her to be. And frankly, I don't know that that's watchable and consumable. And the league and the team better understand that. I'm sorry, I don't want to see 12-6 out of Caitlin Clark every night. I don't, or any other player I'm interested in watching. That's just a fact. Yeah, those numbers are okay for Sophie, but not the player that ought to be treated like Jordan. Are you mental? No. You got a full-on PR campaign going on right now. The media is...
The implication that those people lack the full picture came across to some as a dismissal of the energy they had invested on her behalf. White's version of events framed the sideline exchange as straightforward coaching, a competitive challenge issued to a player, and drew a parallel to men's sports, arguing that the same kind of exchange would barely register as newsworthy in a different league context. That comparison drew pushback. The argument that sideline confrontations between coaches and star players routine in men's sports does not hold up particularly well against the actual record.
You got a full-on PR campaign going on right now. The media has stepped in. This is People magazine. People. Caitlin Clark downplays sideline spat with Coach Stephanie White. Those things happen all the time. Not like we saw the other day. Again, there was hate and venom in Stephanie White's eyes, and you could see it. You could see it. That's not how this happens. The Indiana Star
High-profile incidents of that nature are relatively rare and tend to generate significant coverage when they do occur. White also described her relationship with Clark as great, used language closely echoing Clark's own phrasing, and suggested the story had been kept alive purely because Clark-related content generates traffic. She framed the tension narrative as a product of the attention economy, rather than any genuine dysfunction. Cheryl Miller, who had taken a notably critical position toward Clark in the immediate aftermath of the incident, raising the idea that Clark's sideline behavior had become disruptive and that other players had to intervene to restore calm, subsequently softened her stance considerably.
That's not how this happens. The Indiana Star, or Indianapolis Star, Indiana Fever star Caitlin Clark and Coach Stephanie White debunk any rumors of tension between the two, with both calling their relationship, quote, great. This is what Caitlin also said, and I went, ew. I got to keep it real. When I heard this, it was like, ew. Quote, when I got hurt at the Connecticut game last year, I bawled in Steph's arms. That's somebody I will ride.
In a follow-up segment with Sue Bird, Miller extended more understanding toward Clark, acknowledging the scale of pressure on a young player coming back from injury and noting that she could relate to the emotional difficulty of those moments even if they had never previously played out so publicly. The shift in tone was visible enough to draw attention on its own. The more pointed question running underneath the entire episode is whether the SWA current coaching structure is equipped for the environment it operates in. The argument being made by critics is not simply that White and Clark disagree. Disagreement between coaches and players are part of every sport, every level.
Connecticut game last year, I bawled in Steph's arms. That's somebody I will ride for the rest of my life. People just sit on their phones all day. They don't see those moments. They don't see the moments when we come into work. They don't see the moments that absolutely suck and people have your back. But they know everything, and in reality, they don't have a clue. I think the problem that a lot of people had was they sat on their phones all day. Well, yeah, people are supporting you. They are.
The argument is that the visibility attached to this particular franchise and this particular player demands a level of situational awareness and man management sophistications that the available evidence suggests may be in short supply. When a coach's most notable public confrontation involves the player who is single-handedly responsible for the league's current commercial moment, and the aftermath requires a coordinated media response to contain the damage, the structural question becomes harder to sidestep. Historical parallels from other sports suggest that coach-player tensions that reach a certain level of public visibility tend to have a relatively short remaining shelf life, regardless of which party is ultimately held responsible.
They are. Your fans are going to war for you. And in reality, they don't have a clue. Yeah, why say that about the people that are riding and dying for you as a player? These fans care about Caitlin Clark and spend a lot of time going to combat online and defending her when she has a bad game. Oh, it'll be okay next combat online and defending her when she has a bad game. Oh, it'll be okay next time, blah, blah, blah. Come on. Don't give us the sense that you don't appreciate that, because that's not a great look. And Stephanie White, this is her comments. Let's play them.
Yeah, I'll get it started. Steph, we saw the clip probably everywhere between you and Caitlin. How would you describe what happened in that moment and the relationship you have with Caitlin overall?
I think what happened in that moment is I was challenging a player. It's coaching. It's what it is. I don't often think it's what it is. I don't often think it becomes an issue if you're watching it in men's sports most of the time. And my relationship with Caitlin is great. Like, I love Caitlin. I ride with her. Like, we have a great relationship. And I think that the narrative of people trying to make it something that it's not is just, taking sensationalism to try to get some clicks and all the other stuff. She wants to be coached. I want her to help me be a better.
So we're blaming social media? Everybody saw the video. By the way, I keep hearing this, what happens in men's sports. Well, guys, I've been consuming men's sports for 44 years that I can absolutely vividly remember, and I've seen that maybe twice, including a couple of years ago. Travis Kelce was screaming at Andy Reid on the sideline, and they were kind of going back and forth. And before that, I couldn't tell you the last time I saw it. So no,